Police commanders will be empowered to overrule watchdog findings against their colleagues when a new agreement between the South African Police Service and the Independent Police Investigative Directorate, IPID, takes effect. Now, the draft agreement was attached as an annexure in Police Minister Bheki Cele's response to parliamentary questions last month. But what does this agreement actually mean? Does this mean that police will police themselves? When will this agreement be signed, and what will become of IPID? Well, to find out, we're now joined by Daneel Knoetze, who's a reporter and editor of Viewfinder, an accountability journalism project. Let's find out from him what this actually means. Thanks so much for joining us. Good to talk to you again, Daneel.
Thank you so much for having me, Peter.
All right, so the introduction has alarmed me quite a bit, actually. Give us some background as to where we got to and what this agreement plans to do.
Well, I framed it as an agreement in our reporting, but in actual fact, this has been happening all along. The IPID Act is very clear that the police must institute disciplinary recommendations and action against their members if they are found to have erred criminally or in terms of misconduct in the cases that IPID investigates. And these are mostly cases of assault, misuse of force, killings, even rape and torture by police officers. What this agreement has done now is affirm that commanders within the police service have an ability to overrule those findings by the watchdog and to short-circuit the police disciplinary process before it has actually been instituted or started. I say this has been happening all along because with this background, we went and looked at the data and we found numerous instances where it's very clear that the police have made these decisions, which essentially amount to veto decisions of the police watchdog. And in effect, it means that the police are now enabled or will soon be enabled and confirmed to be enabled to overrule findings of criminality, prima facie evidence of criminality against their own members.
All right, so, when I look at the name, Independent Police Investigative Directorate, I mean, their job is independently to look at the actions of police. How can they be even coming into an agreement with those that they will be investigating?
Well, this goes to one of the fundamental inconsistencies in the existence of IPID. It really exists as an independent investigative body, if one can say it as such, but the intention of IPID really is to work with police management towards professionalizing the police service and ensuring that discipline is instilled and maintained within the police service. That model is premised upon a buy-in and a political will of police management to work with IPID and to enforce IPID's recommendations. What this new agreement shows us and what the reality of that relationship has shown us in the past is that there is a deep and inherent conflict of interest in terms of outsourcing the execution and the implementation of IPID's findings to the very institution that it is investigating. And that is what Parliament and police oversight policy sector in general is grappling with at the moment. Even though the word independent is in there, the reality is anything but that in terms of the full follow-through of the investigations and the sanctions and the proceedings that should follow from those investigations.
So we know that this serves the police in protecting their own. Why would the independent IPID go along with this? Were you able to engage with them?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think there's a recognition within IPID that this has been a frustration for years. The fact that the police really have the power to be the arbitrators of its decisions and its findings. But as to why IPID would go along with it, one has to remember there's politics within government and there's lines of command and hierarchy, and IPID's executive director falls under the police minister. And these are very uncomfortable kind of investigative findings to be bringing out, right? Even though it's accepted within the status quo, it's not comfortable for IPID to be, or at least for the police to be called out as undermining IPID, when in reality that is what's happening on the ground on a regular basis. And my suspicion around this is that it's so firmly entrenched in the status quo, and that IPID is so diminished in its ability to challenge the might of the police ministry and the might of the police service in this instance, that it has done what it's done in the past, and that's really gone along and not rocked the boat. Of course, there are exceptions to that, and one I must point out is IPID head Robert McBride going after corruption during the state capture era. But in terms of the rank and file police officers, this status quo has been in place for many years. And it seems with this new agreement that it would be codified and remain in place for years to come unless we do something about it.
And this agreement, these terms of reference were presented to the police's portfolio committee in Parliament. What did the head of that committee, Tina Jomat-Pettersson, have to say?
Well, she admitted that Parliament hasn't given its full consideration and robustly engaged with these terms of reference. But what she did say is that she agreed with the analysis, at least, of Viewfinder's investigation in a broad sense, and that the committee would vehemently oppose any agreement or side deal that is out of sync with the intention and with the mandate that is given by the legislative framework, the laws that govern police oversight. And as I've mentioned before, the IPID Act makes it very clear that police discipline, initiation of disciplinary proceedings is not optional under the IPID Act Section 30. And so this clause in this agreement really flies in the face of what the law of police oversight and governing police oversight in South Africa calls for.
All right. So we know from your investigations that this behavior has been going on anyway. Is this just a way to formalize it?
Well, what we've seen actually is that as far as the official statistics go, we've seen this take place before, where there are cases that are closed with police commanders saying that no steps will be taken. Those have been in a minute minority in the past in terms of IPID's reporting on the outcomes of its investigations and cases. But in its most recent presentation to Parliament, we've seen that more than half, 229 of the 550 IPID cases that were finalized by the police in disciplinary proceedings ostensibly were dispensed of in this manner. That's a record. I mean, we've never seen that on the record before. And it does indicate potentially that this is becoming more accepted practice, that it's been unchecked for so long, that it becomes an easy way to dispense of these cases. If I may add, it doesn't mean to say that IPID's conclusions are always 100% justified and correct. The point really is that police commanders should not be the arbitrators of that final decision. They should not have the power to veto IPID's conclusions, because there is an inherent conflict of interest in their position as both police commanders and the enforcers of discipline on the police.
What is international standard practice?
It's a good question. My focus has been so deeply focused on IPID that I actually haven't done a huge amount of research. But I think there is consensus that there needs to be some level of accountability and transparency within the police itself, that there is no ability or capacity within IPID to be both an investigative authority and a disciplinary authority, a prosecutorial authority, if you will, to hold the police accountable. The police, we've got over 100,000 police members in this country, and to police that would require a police force of its own, and IPID is not able to provide that. So I think there's consensus that there needs to be political will within the police service to ensure that use of force is appropriate, proportionate, and that discipline management functions correctly, transparently, and that it can professionally, and that it can be trusted by the South African public. And currently, that's not the case. These proceedings happen behind closed doors. These decisions are made without explanations, and they're final. And that shouldn't be the status quo, certainly.
Have you approached the police and said, what if a commander is corrupt and is covering up his corrupt colleagues? Where can you go? It surely can't end there.
Well, I have approached the police many times in the last couple of months investigating this particular issue. I've almost never gotten a response, but in response to this most recent article, they did respond and write an email and said very generally that the recourse would be to elevate a particular case to the office of a relevant provincial commissioner or to the national commissioner. But we know that in reality, well, the question is who should elevate that? Is it IPID? And in reality, we know that that very, very rarely happens. When these decisions are ad hoc communicated back to the IPID, there's very little in reality that the police watchdog can do to challenge them, even though in theory they should be able to go to the provincial commissioner or the national commissioner. That would be an escalation of a complaint, I suppose. But in practice, I've very, very rarely seen that happen. And I have looked and spoken to IPID provincial heads to that very point.
So as we speak, there's no one really watching the police.
It's a tough question, but I would caution to say that that's probably correct. IPID is an overextended institution. It's massively under capacity. And as we see in these investigative findings, even when it does complete investigations and make firm findings and recommendations against police officers, those very often fall on deaf ears. So it's not that there's no one watching the police, because IPID is supposed to serve that function, and to a degree they do. It's just the follow-through of the system and the pipeline that those investigations go into is so dysfunctional. It's so vulnerable to conflicts of interest. There's so many loopholes that can be exploited by unscrupulous people at any given stage that, in effect, the oversight mechanism that we've built in this country becomes completely ineffective.
So now these terms of reference were a part of an annexure that the police minister used in response to questions in Parliament. Does this mean that he's aware of the terms of reference, what they mean, and he actually approves?
Well, I think the challenging thing here is that the terms of reference really just codify what's been happening all along. It's only now that I have really tried to untease them and show them for what they are, that there is a recognition of a challenge here. And so this really is a status quo.
I guess what I'm saying is there is behavior, and people will misbehave or behave or break the rules. But it's another whole thing to put it down on paper and say it is through this authority that I'm able to do X, Y, Z. And I'm just trying to get to understand, does the police minister know that we're giving an actual authority to police commanders to stop investigations, essentially?
Well, I can give you an insight into my engagement with the police ministry on very similar issues. Remember, I've mentioned that at any one moment in this process, the process can be undone. And I've asked the police minister around calls by senior police officers, including the National Commissioner, that the disciplinary regulations, which is a different framework upon which these terms of reference are based, be amended. And that fell on deaf ears. I mean, the police minister's spokesperson had absolutely no time to entertain those kind of queries in terms of my opinion, in terms of how they were received. And on SABC Morning Live, a colleague of yours, Leanne, I believe his name is, she interviewed the police minister when our original expose on discipline management and all of these conflicts of interest came out. And he was very, very dismissive the principles and the dysfunctions that our investigation unearthed. So I can only assume through the lack of response to our queries and to the response that was given to your colleague Leanne on Morning Live that the police minister is indeed deaf to these issues. And I think that there's definitely scope for engaging and escalating this and trying to get a response, because I think silence potentially is complicity in this instance. And certainly there's a lot of opportunity within Parliament, parliamentarians querying this to respond.
All
I'm
right.
sorry that I can't give you more insight into the...
That's fine. We're going to try and get hold of him and try and follow up on this one.
And get me on as well.
All right. Daneel, thank you very, very much indeed. And keep up the good work at Viewfinder. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. All right, so that's Daneel Knoetze speaking to us about a term of reference which will allow police commanders to shut down investigations from IPID that they feel should not go any further.